Welcome, everybody, to the LaunchDarkly Experimentation Summit. Very glad that you've joined us today. We're going to go through a variety of sessions about maximizing the business impact of every product feature through experimentation. I'm James Frost, head of experimentation here at LaunchDarkly. Very excited to be here and chat with Chris Condo, who is a principal analyst at Forrester. We're going to be talking about the latest trends and best practices he's seeing in the industry and how to set product experimentation teams up for success. We'll be talking about the state of experimentation in 2023. Chris, thanks for joining today. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing?
Hey, James, thanks very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Yeah, my name's Chris Condo, principal analyst, as James noted, at Forrester. I've been here since about 2017, 2016. I cover software development tools. The team is called Modern Application Development. And we really think about what are the modern approaches to software delivery. So some of the research themes that we talk about are, software observability. We call it value stream management, being, quantifiably measuring your progress towards software delivery. And then one of the other things is feature management and experimentation, how that really helps teams understand how to focus on whether they're delivering value, how to test in production, and make sure they're really targeting, outcomes versus just straight up outputs.
So Chris, you've done really great work capturing the emerging market of product experimentation within your time at Forrester. How have you seen enterprises shifting to adopt a practice of experimentation in recent years? And a few years ago, you actually promoted FME, or feature management and experimentation, as a category. What made that a logical evolution of feature management?
Yeah, it's a great question, James. So when I first got into it, I was really thinking about just feature flags. That's something I had done as a developer at Microsoft. We wrote our own homegrown feature flag system. And then I interviewed a couple of developers who were using other tools that I would have associated more with marketing, like A/B testing and whatnot. And they were really trying to prove out the value of different algorithms, really kind of engineering kind of experimentation versus market analysis experimentation. And that really got me kind of extremely interested. So we dove into it, and I was still a little hesitant, to be honest, to lump the two together. But the more that we started talking to people that were sort of in the forefront of doing both of them together on software development teams, and seeing this transition from a lot of companies that traditionally think about software, and I'm thinking about like traditional enterprises like insurance or healthcare or oil and gas or banking, who think about software as something they needed to do, had transformed that thought process into, this software is really part of our product DNA. We really need to be thinking about everything we do in software as a product, and products have outcomes, and the only way to get and drive good outcomes is with some manner of experimentation. And so the idea of being hypothesis driven and really that becoming part of the product team's DNA really was of great interest to me. So we wrote about it, we lumped them together. We might have been a little bit early for many of the folks that we write to and whatnot, but I feel like the economic climate is right for people who want to improve and increase the impact with the number of resources they have, really try to drive that home. So I feel like this is actually a very interesting time to be talking about this and writing about it. So I'm really excited to be here and be able to share this with you.
Yeah, speaking of the economic climate, I'm curious, maybe we do a quick pulse on some of the challenges that product teams are actually facing today. What are you seeing? What do you think is shifting the landscape?
Well, I think that when we talk to a lot of dev leaders, they're overwhelmed by really large backlogs. And I often ask them, I'm like, well, do you know if anything in the backlog is actually going to like provide value? Do you know if it's actually moving the needle on what the marketing team really wants or what the product team wants? And by and large, they really don't have a lot of visibility. And so when we talk about this kind of technology with them and the fact that you can get pretty much instant updates on, I shipped a new feature. Is anybody using it? That's really important, because when you only have a budget of X and you can't do 2X anymore because that's not the economic time we live in, you have to get the biggest bang for the buck. And so To me, that means measuring every single thing that goes out the door, understanding whether you're hitting the mark with your customers or not, and really driving that back into the DevOps loop, right? We always talk about DevOps. It's always about automating things out the door, but no one's ever thinking about the information that comes back to say, are we doing the right thing? To me, this is the piece of the technology puzzle that really brings that loop back to the development team, back to the product team to let them know that they're making the right decisions and where to invest and where to divest, to be quite honest.
100%. I think the thing that really resonates with me is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, is this shift from descriptive analytics to sort of prescriptive analytics, and how, if companies are constantly looking in the rear view trying to understand the impact of something that they shipped, weeks and months ago, they're just leaving so much opportunity on the table in between. So I guess, how do you see, and I think you've already sort of mentioned this a bit, but how do you see the collision course between product experimentation and where these companies are today and the value that they're trying to drive?
Well, I still think for many companies, we are early in the maturity stage. One of the most important things that I learned from this research is that being able to formulate a valid hypothesis and then run an experiment on that is really important, and it's not necessarily easy. And so having the right expertise on your product team so that you're not just like throwing things against the wall and hoping something will stick, right? That's kind of a recipe for disaster with customers. And what you really want to do is be very thoughtful. The changes that you want to make to products are sometimes incremental, not necessarily massive. But you can learn a lot from understanding how products, product companies like yourselves and other people that have been in the software industry do it, understand how the technology can help you, build that muscle. But I think a lot of companies still need to get there. I kind of see it kind of as a two-stage thing, is that if you can do feature management, then you can think about the next step of like, all right, well, now that we've got feature management, how do we get to experimentation? How do we try and at least compare the new version with the old version? Is the new version actually working better? Is it actually doing what we set out to do, right? That's an experiment unto itself that most people don't even think to conduct. They just assume that hey, the bug's fixed, ship it. But they might have actually made things worse. And so, that's sort of like, your first sort of foray into experimentation from the development side. When you get the product team involved, then it gets more exciting because they think about, what if we did this feature instead of that feature? Or what if we tried a different variation? Or what if we had an interstitial page and not an interstitial page? Those sorts of experiments then become exciting because you start driving metrics from the telemetry of, did we increase the signups or did we improve customer satisfaction? And you can get that feedback very quickly with these kinds of tools. Like you said, you're not waiting for the next quarter's results to find out if it worked or not.
Exactly. I think that's spot on. One of the interesting shifts that I'm seeing that's probably happened in the last few years is just around how rapid the adoption is. So tech forward companies have been doing this now for 2 decades, right? You can look back to Amazon and Microsoft doing product experimentation early 2000s, if not sooner. But now what we're starting to see is product experimentation, not just marketing experimentation and the business side of experimentation, but product experimentation is being taught in university courses and master's programs. And one of the phenomenon that I've been seeing really, really frequently is that individuals who sort of started their careers at tech forward companies are now sort of fanning out into other parts of the industry, and they're bringing this expectation with them. They've worked at a company that used this as a critical edge, and so when they're joining new companies, they have this expectation that the place they're going to is going to be sort of taking advantage of that. And I've heard of people sort of struggling when they join companies that are not already doing it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I don't see that much different than other kinds of like things that have happened with tech forward companies, right? You get all these companies that are aspirational tech forward companies who are really looking at the leaders of those teams or the individual developers on those teams and saying, if we want to get better, we got to get the right personnel who understand it. And so it's naturally going to filter down from the pinnacle of, software expertise down to the next generation. And I think that that's a natural flow that happens in a lot of technology adoption curves. So to me, this is just another case where that happens. What is interesting, though, is that, from an analyst perspective, is that not only do I see that sort of happening, but it feels like there are more companies that are trying to serve those needs that are also coming out of, announcing that they have new products, or their small tech teams leaving some of those large unicorns and creating their own companies, whatever. So, um, you know, people don't invest in companies, and companies don't exist if they don't have customers. So obviously something's going on, right? And so it feels like that um, kind of motion that you talked about is sort of like that tide that's rising all ships. Everyone's thinking about how to become more product oriented. It's really quite remarkable when you hear an energy company talking about internal software and trying to be more product oriented, like we're switching from project to product. I'm not exactly sure they know what it means, but they're trying to do it anyways. And so I feel like there is a lot of momentum there.
So true. So I guess shifting gears a little bit, what we've been seeing is the same sort of set of traits in high-performing product teams that we work with. One particular thing is this shift towards a platform teams approach. Now, there was a Forrester article, I think it's New Tech, Digital Product Management Tools in Tech, and in that article, it's recommended that regardless of the organizational structure, you want to design your tech portfolio to support engineering as a tightly integrated team. And I think this is sort of what you're touching on. Could you share a bit more of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in general, when we did research a couple of years ago on DevOps, there was a lot of like clickbait kind of articles like DevOps is dead and things like that. So we just pretty much put out a premise document that said, hey, is DevOps dead in your organization? What's going on? And what we found out is that most companies would absolutely say that DevOps is alive and well. It drives, resilience. It drives business results. It helps them get shorter time to market and whatnot. But they really were trying to make the next leap. And so there was a couple things going on. First of all, the complexity of software architectures is exploding with cloud and hybrid, and everyone's on multiple platforms now. It didn't really work out that you went from on-premise to the cloud. It was sort of like you took like three steps and you stayed in every single one of them, right? And so you're at the bottom of the mountain, the middle of the mountain, and at the top of the mountain all at the same time. And you're also into microservices. You also have not one big team. I mean, at Microsoft, we had one big team working on the UI for Office 365. That's probably like 20 different teams right now, all working on different microservices. How does anyone keep track of all that, right? How does anyone manage all that? And if every single team is doing their own tools, that's a lot of duplication of effort. That's a lot of chaos. So what we heard from a lot of organizations is that DevOps is sort of reach the complexity tipping point where it's an engineering science onto its own. All of the tools that are necessary to create a nice and compact and consolidated software delivery chain might make sense to be on a platform team. So it is trendy to have a platform team right now. We'll see how long it lasts. It allows teams that they argued like to hire people that were specifically for that role, because before that it was sort of sacrilegious to say you had a DevOps engineer or a DevOps team. And they said, well, once we called it that, we could actually hire people because people knew what we meant. Nobody knew what we meant when we said we want an engineer who understands automation. Now, what does that mean? Well, you have critical mass around the complexity and building out a system of software delivery. Well, that also, I think, will give leverage to those teams and those companies to say, what about this other type of technology? Like, what about feature management? That should be part of our platform. What about experimentation? That should be part of our platform. So whereas before, each individual team had developers owning their own tool sets and their own tool chains, they might say, hey, I'm overwhelmed. I can't manage another vendor or another tool set. Now we have a platform approach where it's probably a lighter lift for them to think about how those things all integrate. So I see that the two things are complementary as far as market growth goes. I don't necessarily think a platform team is going to make their experimentation better or make them better engineers. I just think that it'll help grow the adoption rate of such technology because There'll be a budget for it. There'll be people who can support those tools in a professional way. And I think they'll also come to understand that it does actually provide a better separation of duties than probably what they have right now. And so for companies that are in a compliance situation or scenario or want greater governance, um, I mean, you can't beat having some system that deploys code and then someone else who releases the code. I think that's that's going to be very, I think, appealing to companies that are thinking about those sorts of concerns.
Yeah, I suppose there's definitely a set of teams that we've worked with that seem to adopt these practices more rapidly, sort of onboard more quickly. Are there characteristics about those teams, these sort of high at the organizational level, they become sort of high
Yep.
performing in the tech space? What are they doing differently?
Yeah. So the teams that are doing it right are thinking about things in terms of product and business. So their structure is aligned towards business and business product services. Underneath that team, there might be, engineering, product ownership, maybe even security and infrastructure and tests dedicated to getting the product out the door. They're thinking about how to make the product better. The anti-pattern to that is companies that remain siloed, think that they can't be disrupted, or have their head in the sand. Their business stakeholders create a backlog. The backlog gets processed first in, first out. Nobody in the engineering team really thinks about the outcomes. It's somebody else's job. Customer experience is somebody else's job. And then it goes over to the infrastructure team, and they're just as dysfunctional as they ever were. The reality is that every company is in a space where they can be disrupted. Every company is a software company today. And if they're not thinking about at least feature management and experimentation on the development side, at least to make sure they're releasing good code and it's working right and doing the bare minimum, they're really they're setting themselves up for failure.
I couldn't agree more. You said something interesting. So there's sort of the FIFO backlog approach, which is really at a strong tension with the sort of need to show value, to drive more impact, to be more efficient that we're seeing at the macroeconomic level. There was a term in one of Forrester's recent articles that talks about gold plating.
Yeah.
And it sort of, I love that because I think that there's so much to be gained by understanding how you can use experimentation in this context to sort of get out of that FIFO backlog approach and drive more business impact. What are sort of the scenarios that you're seeing in the absence of experimentation today?
Yeah. So, the gold plating is a thing I was once accused of. That's why I remembered it so well. Anyways, it really comes, the idea is that, a product manager is really trying to think about every possible feature that could possibly make their customer happy without really having data to back it up. It's like, let's just put every single thing we think we need. We can't ship the product until we have it done. Or it could be an engineer saying, like, I'm going to write the perfect algorithm, or a tester that says, every test must be 100% passed, and like really not being able to accept any sort of risk that the customer might not get all the features they want, or the product might not be perfect, or that, we're missing some very test that's egregious or whatever. The reality is that you don't know how the customer is going to react to your product. You don't really know if you fix something, it turns out, until it's actually running, because the systems are so complex these days, it's difficult to model them. And you can't test quality into products. You just have to keep learning and iterating and mitigate risk. And so what I see happening on the negative side is a lot of companies are just trying to throw as many features into the backlog as they can, but they don't even bother to know if the features resonate with users, if the features deliver any value, or are having any sort of intended impact on the business. And so if you know those things, if you have like a hypothesis that I think this new feature is going to improve customer retention by 10%, then you should put your money where your mouth is and measure it. Did it really happen? I think that this new feature is going to be used more than the old feature. Let's just do a comparison. Did it really happen? Are people really using it or not? Or I think completion rate will improve with this change to this form. Did it really happen or not? If you don't know, like my sort of like, going back to Microsoft, if you don't have a reason for this, then why am I working on it? And so like when someone tells me their backlog has 60,000 items in it, I just say, hey, delete the last 6 months. No one's going to remember them. Move forward. Don't worry about it. They can't do that because they'll get in trouble. But if you don't have a way of prioritizing the value, then you don't know how to make trade-offs. If you are constantly worried about getting everything perfect, you'll never ship anything. And so shipping software, like any product, is a balance, and you have to understand that balance and grow that muscle and understand where's my, where do I want to focus my attention? How do I want to, adjust my strategy to this? How do we make sure we're doing incremental changes, not big, huge changes that we can't be undone? And how do we just keep moving forward, knowing that we're never going to get it 100% right, but if we keep trying and we keep testing and we keep measuring, we can get closer to being right.
Exactly. And you said something really interesting there, incremental changes. I mean, especially now when teams are doing everything that they can to make those 1%, 2% improvements in their product performance and the revenue that they're driving, shipping something that either egregiously hurts the product or even just degrades it a little bit can really harm the velocity of that team. And so we know from a lot of studies and a lot of anecdotal evidence that's floating around that the best product teams generally ship features about 30% of the time that actually drive a positive impact in the direction they were hoping to go. You have the other 30 or so percent where it does basically nothing, and right. the final 30% where it's hurting things. And so in that context, not running experiments and just sort of like barreling forward not only puts you at risk of releasing something that could severely harm the product, but also increasing your surface area, right? You're increasing the product right. surface area with no proven value, adding risk, adding tech debt, all of this sort of thing. And so I think that incremental approach is more important now than ever.
Yeah, it's a great point. Especially like you said, you have this surface area of this product that has a lot of different tentacles that, let's say that, your customers are using half of the capabilities that you put out there to them. You've got this other half that's just sitting there. It's not that it has zero cost. Someone's triaging issues on it. Somebody's fixing bugs. Somebody's trying to hack it. It brings a lot of extra cost. Even if it doesn't cause harm, it's costing your company. It's like interest, you're paying on a loan. It's like it's not helping you get further ahead. It's holding you back. It's keeping back a percentage of your resources to keep that thing running, even if nobody's using it. It absolutely delivers negative value, to your point. And worse so, it could deliver harm to your brand and to your company if something's neglected and no one's looking at it and it turns out it's like a backdoor to something, right? So yeah, for sure. Those are things that, we try to tell people, like, here's why it's important to measure what you're working on, because it's important to keep track of all those things. It's a form of technical debt that most people don't think about as technical debt. But like, I consider, if you have a backlog full of stuff that's not delivering value and you have a team that's triaging that, that's like debt that you're just accumulating that has no value.
Exactly. And I think there's a conundrum that teams run into where they're shipping something that they don't actually expect to move their primary metric, or they don't think they have a way to detect the change because it might not be sensitive enough. And I think that sort of undermines, well, should we even run an experiment in this case? And what I've seen is that you can make a case for releasing a new surface area that's going to accrue to future value. It still makes sense to run the experiments to make sure that you're not doing harm, right? That you're not unintentionally damaging, the progress that you've made.
I would agree with that. Like, it doesn't hurt to make sure that the next iteration, even if it's a small one or you don't think you'll have the numbers to validate it's better than the old one, just make sure it's not worse. At minimum, right? Be like the doctor, do no harm. But no, it's a great point.
So we hear from companies quite a bit. They're not ready to experiment today, or there's reasons why they shouldn't be experimenting. In your experience, what do you think is behind that concern, or maybe that fear of these bad outcomes if they invest the time to do it? Are you seeing inaccurate assumptions being made there?
Yeah, I think that many companies have good intentions, but aren't thinking about experimentation in the right frame of mind. Uh, as we were just talking about, experimentation can simply be, is the new version better than the old version? That's one thing, which I think every company should do, and that's a form of experimentation. The next one is that, like, well, that's only for high-end retailers. It's not for me. But why not? Why not have, even if you're a local bank, even if it's my credit union, which I wish they would do, why not test out a couple of new scenarios to see if you can make my life better? I don't like my current experience, but, and I'm thinking about changing banks. Why not, even if it's a small number of users, try to retain me as a customer? Try to do some experimentation to see how can I make the experience better? How can I get more feedback? There's nothing wrong with that. There's also this notion that, like you said, it's going to add all this process. Well, it doesn't add process if you have a product team and you can compartmentalize the kind of experiments you want to run. I could envision it adding process if you had to go to, run across to the other side of the building, or, other side of the team, talk to marketing and get involved in these big collaboration, meetings, and what are we going to experiment on? But that's really not the purpose of this type of experimentation. It's how can we tweak the features? How can we make the product better? Within this space that we're trying to serve our customers' needs, how do we make this better? And there's nothing wrong with trying a few ideas. You have to run them every day, but in growing that muscle, I think, is important. Um, if you're not constantly trying to improve your product, it's pretty much dead, I guess is the way I'd look at it, or it's stagnant. And so that means experimentation should be a daily thought process anyways. What could we be doing? How can we move the product forward? Doesn't mean you're running an experiment every 5 minutes, or, running all kinds of different complicated A, B, C, functional variations or whatever. But it does mean you're thinking about the impact and always trying to improve the experience of your end user.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think when companies do hear that word, they sometimes make this leap to what I would consider really cutting edge experimentation, where
Yeah.
these are things that have taken teams 5 years to reach that point. And the truth is that there's a much easier step into this area that provides a lot of value and is much more approachable. And we've talked about it quite a bit already, but it's this idea of at least detecting regressions, right? And this
Right.
ability to take all of the signal that the company is already producing, whether it's operational metrics or product metrics or even business metrics, and use experimentation as a tool to understand when a feature they're shipping is causing a regression in any one of those. And the thing that I've seen is when companies do this, it doesn't require perfect hypothesis development. It doesn't require a lot of the overhead, because it gives you a way just to know if something is wrong, and all of these assets that you already have in place become this safety net that allows you to work on features and ship features knowing that you likely are not doing damage, at least.
Right. Well, I mean, the problem is most people rely on, I would call it infrastructure telemetry, to know if a feature is working. Well, it got shipped, the container's running, um, the website, shows up on our telemetry as running, or the mobile app, got downloaded, but no one ever knows or checks to see, but is it better? Did we actually fix the issue that was, broken? Did we, reduce, whatever the transaction time it takes to do a banking transaction, or did we improve some sort of performance aspect? Um, if you're going to spend the time to do something, measure to see if you actually made it better. Why would you want to spend your time working on something and not know if you actually fixed it or not? And I kind of feel like, if you get into engineering, you get into it to solve problems. And the one thing that probably turns engineers off is if they think they're working, but they don't know if they're actually solving any problems. I would think this would be something that would jazz a lot of developers up, and they'd really want to be interested in, because who doesn't like to test a hypothesis to see, did I actually make it better or worse? Did this algorithm actually work better or worse? Is the search algorithm working better or worse? And so forth. And so, like you said, It's not rocket science to make these leaps. You're working on something, you're changing something. Why are you changing it? Because you're an expensive resource. You should only be working on things that you know are going to make things better or are going to add new capabilities or whatever, right? And so they're worth measuring.
Exactly. So, how are you seeing teams actually adopting these technologies together? If teams are getting started in the DevOps journey, any advice on where they could get started?
Well, I guess what I would say is that the companies that are doing feature management and experimentation together are really starting out from the get-go saying, we're going to be a product team, and this is how product teams work, and so we're going to adopt this methodology. Then there's sort of a separate team that's like, we're going to shift over to feature management. We're going to ship features, asynchronously from each other, and they see feature management more as a different form of release management and deployment management versus a system for experimentation. I think it's more of the mindset of we want to be product oriented and product led. That's really driving the two together. I still feel that they go together because I think that's the motion that people should be thinking or aspiring to be. But that's just my opinion. If you're a developer who's just trying to make your life easier, and feature management makes your life easier because you can deploy and release features in the daylight hours, and you don't have to stay up all night wondering if they went out the door, that's fine too. But it's sort of like two different mindsets, James, if you understand where I'm coming from.
I 100% do. I think on the on the side of starting down sort of the feature control, feature management path first, and then evolving over time, I think it's interesting to step back and say, look, a lot of companies have walked this path. Let's learn from the mistakes that those companies have made and where they've become stuck. And one of the things that I've seen very frequently is that a company will say, first, we're going to start with feature management and we'll mature, and at some point we'll get into experimentation down the road. And it's not the worst, right, to start in on the control side, but there's a bit of a detour I've seen companies take, which is they start with feature management, and then they use their descriptive analytics tools to try to infer the impact that their features are having. And so what I mean by that is they take reporting tools and they start looking at charts and they're looking at all the telemetry they're generating, and they try to time the release or the thing being turned on with some impact. And it's a bit of a trap in my experience, because what'll happen is that type of analysis is very easy to poke holes in. It's very easy to sort of end up reading tea leaves and making assertions that others don't trust, and then you kind of fall into the cycle of teams that start to not trust the data. And so the thing that I always recommend is, even if you're going to baby step into experimentation and into release measurement, don't take that detour. See it as a separate sort of complementary approach that you can do. But when you're ready to start making decisions based on data, do it from the perspective and the approach that's going to actually lead to trustworthy results, is going to build confidence, as opposed to sort of leaving that out, for a few years down the road.
Yeah. I kind of think of it, and this just came to me, but when we were dealing with like terabytes of data in log files, we try to use timestamps to correlate events, and it turned out like you couldn't do it in a very complex system because there's 1,000 things happening at the same time. You have no idea, if this thing is related to that thing. But when we started adding correlation IDs in, so that a transaction that began with a user, then that correlation ID was tracked at every single level of the architecture, down to the database, back up to the user, then we could actually see the common thread that this user went through the following things, hit a roadblock, and ended up, declining this offer. And if you don't have that ability to correlate what a user is actually seeing with what they're doing, you can't really come up with any kind of reliable system to know that what you're doing is either working or not working. And so I see A/B testing and experimentation as a way to, like, there was a user, we ran this experiment, we're running against cohorts who are kind of like similar users, and this set of users is 10 times more successful than those users. It's clear as day that this is better than that. Versus just trying, like you said, read tea leaves from log files or other information or marketing information that you don't really know in a complex system what's causing the lever to move the right direction.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, just given current environment, where do you see the latest work in AI and machine learning playing into the experimentation landscape?
I think it will actually help. So, as we were saying earlier, the expertise to build a hypothesis or to interpret results, that's something that is actually hard to acquire, right? One of the things we talk about is this whole shift to product management and having product managers of software products. Well, one of the struggles that many companies have is, well, where do I find these people? How do I get that expertise? So I am hopeful that AI and machine learning could actually be like an assistant. Like, we have this data, we have this telemetry, um, we're seeing different results. How do I interpret it? That's one thing. The second one would be, what kind of variations could we do on this product, maybe to drive greater, improvement in certain areas, A, B, and C, whatever. So that's another one. Uh, the other one might be in the fact that when all of these systems are very, distributed, like a microservices architecture, you might need to run multiple different pieces of an experiment collectively. Like it might touch 3 or 4 different pieces of software that you might not realize. And so I feel like helping people understand like a systems engineering approach, like if you're going to run this experiment, don't forget that it's going to impact these other 3 things, and you might need an API that backs it up, or you might need this, you might need that. And so these 3 things need to be run in a coordinated way for the experiment to actually work. And so I think I guess to wrap it up, it would be like helping people with the complexity of running experiments in a very complex architecture, and then interpreting data that might be distributed across multiple different kind of data points, right? In a distributed architecture, there's distributed logs, distributed kind of telemetry. How do I tie it all together? I think that's complicated for a lot of teams. I think AI and machine learning can help it become more approachable, and that people can become more effective at running their experiments. For the high-end people, I'm sure they're drooling, to try to get more information about large language models and large data analysis. But for the more basic cases for people trying to get into it, I think there's a lot of hope there for AI and machine learning as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that. I'll talk about the blank canvas problem with experimentation a lot, and even companies like Microsoft, where we were working with teams who were running hundreds and thousands of experiments a month, it would still present a problem at reaching that full adoption level, because you have these pockets of expertise, you have centers of excellence, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be more teams that want to take advantage of this value prop, and the barrier from going from idea to understanding what you would want to test, how you would want to test it, how you design the experiment, what metrics to use, what all these things that you're talking about. Can require round trips back and forth to these centers of excellence or to your engineering
Right.
team. And so anything that can lower that barrier, at least paint a bit of a picture instead of giving them this blank canvas, can accelerate that adoption and get people comfortable learning and practicing where they might be stuck and nervous that they're going to do damage otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, just helping them get started. Like, what should my next experiment be, right? I think would be very helpful for many teams and for many individuals.
Yep, exactly. So, what do you see on the horizon for the rest of 2023, the next few years? What do you think we should be paying attention to?
Well, I think you can't ignore ChatGPT and interfaces like that, right? I think everyone's expecting every single vendor, company that has a product to have a ChatGPT interface, whether they need it or not. Uh, I think that you'll see in general this maturity of the platform and platform teams. Uh, those people be more willing to take on this new type of technology that might be new to them anyways, and really try to think about how do we up level our DevOps and our whole approach to software delivery to become more like the tech forward companies that we were talking about earlier. Lots of people aspire to be tech forward, and I think that when they think about some of the cultural changes of being product oriented, um, it also means thinking about these things in a very professional way and hiring good talent to manage them. So I think for the rest of the year we'll see more people engaging this type of activity. I certainly intend to do more research in this space to find out how it's evolved over the last year and a half, where people are looking for where clients are looking for help on how to get started, and really to try to hone the message of why there's value in doing like feature management experimentation, even in some of these basic cases like you and I have been talking about, James. So I'm really excited about doing more research in it and really learning more about how users are doing it and where the adoption is right now. I suspect it has accelerated and has grown, but more research needs to be done to understand where people actually are and understand how they're using it in a very tangible way.
I'm certainly looking forward to that. I suppose one last piece of advice that you would give to leaders who are trying to empower their developers to do their best work.
Yeah, I think that you just have to really start trusting the development teams and thinking about equipping them with the right kinds of leadership at the individual contributor level, and allow them to make good decisions based on the data. Listen to the feedback, and you really need two-way communication. There certainly needs to be direction. What is our business objective? Why are we asking teams to do these features? What is the business expectation? What problems are we trying to solve? And then listen to the engineers and say, like, that's not going to solve that problem. Why are you working on that? And or let's put a test and see if we can make it better. And really start thinking, people thinking about uh, the customer and the end user experience, or the end result and the outcome. How can we improve outcomes versus just get more stuff done? And I think then you'll get a really healthy conversation, and you'll really start getting the gears of innovation moving in the right direction.
You reminded me of a favorite story that I heard recently. A product team, actually inside of a gambling category, decided to take bets on which of the experiment variants was going to perform the most. And so they sort of came together and had a good time doing that. What really jumped out to me, though, was that after they had done that sort of once, the team started framing their ideas in terms of the bets that they would make for future
that's awesome.
investments, which was the coolest thing to hear.
Right? I mean, instead of going like planning poker and which one's the biggest, work item, and how many, Fibonacci sequence series is this going to take, like, which one's going to give us the biggest return on investment, and what can we do to get it out soon? How can we incrementally do an MVP, test it out, get it out the door? So stop trying to size things up and think about what's the biggest object, what's the smallest object. Nobody knows anyways. It's always a big guessing game. Instead, think about, where's my biggest return on investment? How can I get started in that direction? How can we incrementally move in that direction and start measuring to see if you're actually doing it? I think that's what the tech forward companies do. They don't waste their time trying to think about how do we move this thing and that's big and that's small, and that stuff just ends up getting in the way of getting real work done, in my opinion.
True. Well, I am exceptionally biased, but this was a really fun conversation for me. I think we covered a lot of ground. So thank you for your time today. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
James, thank you very much. And I really appreciated being here today. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us for that session. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. Up next, we're going to have Aaron Montana talking about how to kickstart your experimentation program.